And so it is. Greetings, dear ones, beloveds. I am the Pah Ekara San, conscious creator and sovereign servant of free energy, upholding the universal principles of love, joy, freedom, truth, life, gratitude, grace, and well-being. Yes, I listed them all once again. Hello, everybody. It is good to see you all, those that are here today and those that are joining us from all over the globe. I am here for what partially is an expected part of a message and partially a slightly unexpected one. Some of this message I planned to deliver recently, last week, during your grand opening of this school here in Zeeland. But because time was pressing in that moment and the energy of the words was quite full, let's say, I decided to wait with this addendum to the message of last week. The other part of this message, which is very strongly connected to the initial piece, is rather unexpected because it deals with a practical evolution on the physical part of your world. However, before I go there, I want to reiterate that my closing words during my previous presentation here are humanity is awakened. And that is not only where I start with this message today, it is also the title of this message. During the previous presentation, I spoke to all of you about the dualistic cycles of consciousness, not of consciousness evolution, but of consciousness suppression. I brought to you an overview that started in the 1960s, turned Woodstock into the stock market, later on, 22 years later, and on into 9/11, the COVID era in the 20s, recently, and onward. I spoke to you also about the possible evolution that would have taken place had this continued locking down of consciousness been successful. We would have then entered the full-blown era of transhumanism, as I already told you. But that did not happen, and that will not happen. However, as I already said, the first part of this message is specifically an addendum to the information that I presented last week. And it is a rather technical addendum. Not a difficult one, but a technical one. As I told you, these cycles of the locking down of human consciousness, beginning with the active ingredient of love in the 1960s, last each a period of 22 years. However, it is not so that these cycles follow each other particularly linearly. It is not so that a 22-year cycle that started in the 60s, for instance, closes down 22 years later, and on that same day or on the next day, the next cycle begins. No. There is an overlap. We are, after all, talking about geometry. And even though you may not think of it in your more linear terms, There is no point in geometry that doesn't overlap with another point in geometry. Take, for instance, a simple triangle. If you think of a triangle, you think of 3 points that creates that triangle. One point, each point, connects to 2 lines. That means that these 2 lines always overlap within that point. And this is the same way for the geometry I have discussed last week. When you look at these cycles, and they have been drawn here for my benefit by the Pah San before the start of this message, then you see, and for the benefit of this message, by the way, of this addendum, I will limit myself to discussing the last 2, the most current 2 cycles. That's why this overview here begins in 2001. Now, in 2001, you of course have the initiation known as 9/11, a dualistic black magic, dark magic working on human consciousness to shut down the active ingredient of reality creation known as freedom, or Va. And for those of you that have studied this material somewhat deeper already, you know what Va also stands for. It is not simply the expression of freedom, it is also an expression to the approach of the unmanifestable reality of the Pa. So without Va, without freedom, a state where not only you recognize there is nothing that comes before and nothing that comes after, a state where you also recognize that the inner reality and the outer reality are the same reality, and a state where you realize that all the actors within the outer and inner reality are the same creator being. That state of freedom is Va, the approach to the unmanifestable metaphysical reality. Those that have studied the study of the Pa know this to some extent. So this state being shut down at the beginning of 2001 with the coming of 9/11, you see it playing through in its 22-year cycle towards the year 2023. That is where we are now. And as I've told you, on September 11, 2023, that cycle was broken. But it is not so that these cycles, as I said earlier, merely overlap. They overlap in a significant way. If I have a look here for you, then you can look at this particular area of the overview of the diagram where we are from the period of 2020 to the period of 2023. Officially here on 9/11/2023, the closing down of the initiation of dark, dualistic, black magic working on the human mind starting all the way back then. Everyone alive and everyone not alive remembers that, because your consciousness and your perception on reality changed. However, in order to make these geometries work, including the inverted ones, including the black magic ones, you need a solid point, a solid foundation for each of the steps you're taking. Much like the ascension path, it is the same for this path of destruction of human consciousness. That point creates a pivotal scenario here between the closing down of the original cycle of the shutting down of freedom and the beginning of the shutting down, the cycle that shuts down truth, starting in 2020 with your COVID era. So as you can see, a new cycle begins, new duality, new bullshit, new stories, new illusions are thrown at you before you can even deal with the closing down and the letting go of the previous cycle. This happens every single time. And this is how you fit 22-year cycles in a period that is not exactly 4 times or 5 times or 6 times 22. This overlapping point is what has been described in the previous Imzaia material as the chaotic spectacular. Now you can go back to the previous material created in, I believe, 2008, 2009, where there are beings known as Da Zebulon San and Da Ziona San that explain about the chaotic spectacular in a significant and far-reaching way. I will not go into this today. What I will say about it, however, it is not that the chaotic spectacular is not constantly accessible by those that seek to project themselves into a 4th dimensional astral state. Yes, it is always accessible and it is always there to work with. You could call it, in a way, the undercurrent of this hologram. Imagine being on the motherboard of your computer. You would see a very different stream of electrons and energy than what you eventually see on your screen. You see all of the potentials that can be manifested on the screen in that moment, not only the ones that are being manifested. And so is the same for the chaotic spectacular. That space has everything that could possibly be manifested in what Plato used to call an ideal state of being. So the chaotic spectacular does not have every chair that you are currently sitting in, but it has the concept of every chair that you currently sit in as the concept of the ultimate chair. That is the chaotic spectacular. Now, this is also why this space is so very important and why it is used to overlay multiple events from 2 different parts of the geometry intended to shut down human consciousness. Because everything is accessible in there. As I said before, even in the so-called dark workings of creation, like this is one that has happened to all of you, there are very specific patterns and very specific rhythms that have to be followed. This means that if you look at, there would have been here in 2001, for instance, another overlapping period. These are the periods where your life on this earth, where in a way the world stage and also therefore the world mind goes a little bit berserk, where certainties fall away, both on the financial market, in the political arenas, in the warmongering arenas, and even in the personal perspectives on reality and what it means to be human. So here you would have had another one of those chaotic, spectacular moments. What the process is, as I shared earlier, that needs to be followed very succinctly is how much a human mind can be pressured into adapting to a state that is in itself unnatural and a pattern of creation that is not the desired pattern of the heart. Those are these years, these few years of overlapping, which you can almost consider the vaccination of the human mind on all of these metaphysical levels. The overwhelming of the human immune system on a global level, if you will, with information, with shattering of reality concepts, which then, in the period to follow, calms down as the new reality, the so-called new normal. Last time they actually said it. They said the quiet part out loud, you know what I mean. The so-called new normal is then supposed to settle in the period, sorry, not here, in the period here in between, after the overlap is over and you have your 20 odd years to get your generations used to their new life in the animal farm, if you will. Then the process starts all over again. Now, I'm saying all of this with a lot of detail to it because you will see it is quite important for current events. I said that this message is being recorded a week after the original message that I presented. We are now once again sitting on Sunday. And for the last 48 hours to 72 hours on Earth, there has been a major development, as probably everyone watching here knows, on the world stage. This development has to do with Israel. The attack, which literally by the government in Israel is being called a war on Israel, took place. Now, if you look at your social media, then you will see, especially the social media, by the way, that is still free, such as X. Look there, and you will see what the analysts are already saying. They are saying, this is Israel's 9/11. This should never have happened. All of the so-called Mossad agencies and those types of people failed supposedly to observe this building threat to Israel, which occurred that morning a couple of days ago with the launching of thousands and thousands of missiles and unfortunately the death of many, many people and the suffering. Now, before I continue, people, I want to say that this is not a political message. This is not a message on current affairs. Anything I say here does not validate any side of this argument. It does not validate any side of this argument. What happened in Israel, what happened in 2001, what happened in 2020, anytime these things happen, it is abhorrent. The loss of human life and the human suffering can never be validated on any level of reality, including a political level or whatever. That is our point of view. However, I am speaking metaphysically about this event. Because, unfortunately, and this is the part that we were not planning to talk about, obviously, unfortunately, in the events that currently happened in Israel, we see a metaphysical proof of concept to what I have been sharing here with you today and last time I was here. Last time I told you that on September 11, 2023, the cycle that started in 2020 as well as the cycle that ended in 2023 was broken. Now, the breaking of these two cycles did not happen per se because of the 2 to 3 years here in the so-called COVID era. It happened because of the breaking down of the endpoint of the previous cycle. So it did have nothing to do, in a way, with the cycle of truth that was attempted to be broken here between 2020 and 2042 through the COVID and other means that were being planned. But instead it has mostly to do with the collapsing of the narrative of this one, the 2001 cycle. Not only, as I've said to you before, do you now see more and more truth coming out that previously was hidden behind closed doors, behind confidential files. Only recently did you see the Kennedy family come out and openly speak about the assassination that happened a while ago that I don't need to go any deeper into, and openly admitting that it happened through the government itself. That's one of those pieces. Once these narratives begin to fall apart, as I've already told you, in people's minds, more and more of these narratives begin to fall apart. And so it happened with the 2001 narrative, which of course for many on this earth already had fallen apart years ago, if not instantaneously. Even here in the Netherlands, where currently the political theater has started up again because of an election year, they are literally, these politicians, trying to attack each other by asking them whether they believe in the official 9/11 narrative or not. That's how far it has gone up to the mainstream. So, it is because of that narrative falling apart that basically the 2020 to 23 paradigm has fallen apart. It also means that the attack on truth that was planned for the next 22 years fell apart. I've told you this last time already. And this is why I say the current state of affairs in Israel is proof of concept. Because as I told you, there are now two issues which, in my opinion, are not fixable to those trying to facilitate the full manifestation of this spell that you see here in front of you. And it is as follows. First of all, the cycle that broke, as I say repetitively in this conversation, is the freedom cycle, not the truth cycle. These cycles, first of all, need to be built up very specifically. You cannot just start with joy, then do freedom, then do love. They are specific cycles of reality creation. Also when you want to fuck things up for human consciousness. So that means that because of the collapsing of the 2001-2023 cycle, the entire cycle of the COVID narrative and all of these things can no longer be executed, and what you see as a default is the need to re-execute the 2001 event. And that is what you are seeing today in Israel. You are seeing the same fundamental war on human consciousness, the same fundamental separatist, divisive idea founded on faith, founded on religion, but now not in the heart of the financial world, in the heart of the bloody, actual world of religion itself. Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, the entire area. In order, and this was an act of desperation for those powers that were, because they needed to create something that was so potent in human consciousness that it literally had biblical proportions. And if you see many of those awake voices on the planet that are falling for this shit, that are either choosing side of Camp A or choosing side of Camp B, you see that we're literally, well, not literally, metaphorically speaking, a few days away from the Crusades about to start, basically. Now, in a different way than before, obviously, more via digital means and that sort of thing, but it is certainly heating up in those areas. But as I said, it was a desperate maneuver. Not only did they have to jump back 22 years to initiate an old flame that now no longer has the same power. As I said, look at your social media where people actually are aware of the truth. Everyone is already calling it out for what it is. Everyone watching this probably will too. Everyone sees this, but maybe not in the detail with which I'm presenting it now. So that horse has left the room. So then the other problem that exists with it is not merely the fact that the reactivation of a previous pattern in the geometry is happening over 20 years late, but also happening here at the end of the chaotic spectacular period where human consciousness now desperately, after the COVID attack, after the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, needed to go into its period of adapting to the new normal. Desperately, everyone can see how people on this earth are charged. They are not ready to take on another lie, another illusion, another fear-based paradigm. Unfortunately, and yet fortunately, it will crack an enormous number of minds. But under that pressure will rise the phoenix that exists within that human being each time. None of these minds will be destroyed. They will crack open like an egg, the light will shine through, and they will be reborn to see this world for what it truly is. That is the state that we are currently at. And that is the big two mistakes made by those trying to run this dark magic working, this con on humanity. Now, that brings us to you. That brings us to what you can do now, what all of you can do now. Because, as I have said last time, you sit in a world of your own making, of your own design. That which exists within you exists outside of you. The ramping up of this conflict into a full-blown hot war on top of the COVID effect and on top of the Ukraine effect that was already happening gives you, reality creators, a perfect geometry. It gives you a triangle. And a triangle, or a geotrinity, like we like to say, is exactly the only thing that you need to put your focus on in order to find the silent point in the center of that triangle. The point known as Pah. So, what I'm telling you here in this short addendum before I leave is to create a slight shift in focus. When you focus on the world mind, when you focus on the world news, when you focus on watching reports fly by on your socials, do what those kids used to do in the 80s when they were trying to see those three-dimensional images in a two-dimensional object. Do you remember? You had to sort of get a bit weird with your eyes, and then you can see the truth that was hiding three-dimensionally in the center of a two-dimensional image. And I'm telling you to do that same thing. A child can do it after all, or at least most children could. I was always one of those that couldn't. No, we didn't have that shit. Anyway, so you take the point that is the COVID information, the COVID era, still in a way attempting to repeat itself. You take the point of the so-called Ukraine-Russia conflict, always streaming past, and you now take the new point of this Israel-Hamas type conflict. And you take those 3 points, you let them exist as a foundational pattern for a reality that you are observing, but from the expressive part of yourself, you focus on the heart of that triangle, which is the unmanifestable part of that triangle. And from there, You focus on the state of freedom in a simple way, like it has been explained in the previous introductory presentations, and you allow that palette to cleanse itself, to neutralize itself. It truly is that simple. It is an exercise that isn't only beneficial to you as an ascension student working with reality creation, but it is an exercise that is at the same time also beneficial to the whole right now, because it will allow you to facilitate the acceleration of the passing of this time into the revival of that which we have called New Earth, where only those states that are foundational, that are unchangeable, that are unfilterable, and that are unstructurable exist. I'm not going to repeat them. Instead, I'm going to let you focus on them as I leave you here for today. I thank you with all of my heart for listening to this addendum. I hope that you understand that the events that we have described in here, albeit dramatic, painful, and abhorrent, are in fact the dying breaths of a system that is desperate to seek a continuation of control over your minds, over your bodies, and over your spirits, and over your chakras themselves. But that unfortunately is going to have to come to terms with the idea of oneness, with the idea of unity, and yes, with the ideas of love and all that goes beyond that. As these chaotic structures, inverted geometries, find their original place within this hologram. And with that, beloveds, I thank you for your time. I wish you all a beautiful continuation of this moment. And I will see you next time. Ea ich, oya ich. As it is, so shall it be. And so it is.